Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County Candidate Forum for Washington State Legislative District 12, positions 1 and 2. Legislative District 12 covers the southeastern portion of Snohomish County, northeastern King County, and all of Chelan County. It includes all the cities along Highway 2 from Monroe East to Chelan and the Wild Sky Wilderness area. I am your moderator, League member Joan Rave. Our candidates for Washington State Legislative District 12 are Keith Goehner for position 1, Mike Steele and Robert Amenn for position 2. As always, the League has invited all candidates and all are joining us today. The League thanks these candidates for running for office, for their willingness to serve if elected, and for participating in the forum. We remind our viewers that the League is nonpartisan. Therefore, we neither endorse nor oppose candidates or parties. We do educate and support voters and the election process in our communities. Rules for participation in this forum were sent ahead of time to all candidates, and they have agreed to engage in respectful communication. Here are the rules for the question and answer period. Questions have not been shared with the candidates. We thank all those community members who sent us recommendations about local issues. Each candidate will have either 60 or 90 seconds to respond. I will state these changes clearly. We are using a countdown timer visible to all candidates, and time limits on answers will be strictly enforced. There is one question which asks for a simple yes or no response, and that question will not be timed. I will change the starting order for each question, rotating through all the candidates to ensure a random and fair sequence. The order for the first question will be Mr. Amenn, followed by Mr. Goehner, and then Mr. Steele. Let's begin. You will have 60 seconds to answer the first question, and we begin with Mr. Amenn. And this one's 60 seconds. What qualifications and experience make you a strong candidate for this position, Mr. Goehner or Mr. Amenn?
Sure. I feel that I'm a good candidate for this position for two areas, two types of experience. I've held elective office before. I was on the Goehner City Council. In my activity as a Goehner City Council, I was elected 2 times Snohomish County Cities and Towns organization. It's a lobby organization that represents the cities in Olympia. So I've got a good sense of how Olympia works. And as well as I've been participating on a number of different boards, community transit, HUD. So I have a lot of experience in politics. Particularly what it's given me is it taught me how to get things done. As on Snohomish Cities and Towns, we were able to pass a number of key pieces of legislation. That's the one area. And it also made me realize how the sausage is made. Like, I understand the weaknesses and the strengths of any kind of political system. So that's one level of experience. The other level of experience that I bring is I've been in.
Your time is up, Mr.
Okay.
Amenn.
Sure.
So sorry.
That's all right.
Next is Mr. Goehner. Same question.
Thank you. Well, my experience in elected office goes back a ways, but probably my first elected office was a school board member. And I was involved in the community and had an opportunity. I was also a teacher, so I have educational background. But then I served 4 terms as a Chelan County Commissioner, and that gave me a great opportunity with multi-million-dollar budgets, serving on numerous committees and different councils, and both locally and statewide. So it gave me exposure to things throughout the state. So that was a great experience. And then I've served now 2 terms in the state legislature, and it's given me an opportunity to serve as a ranking member on the local government, and I also on transportation and environment and energy. And it's given me an opportunity to utilize the experiences that I've had throughout the years. And it's been a great privilege.
Thank you. And Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Joan, very much. My elected experience goes back a ways as well. I served 2 terms on the City of Chelan City Council, was the youngest member of Rotary ever elected as president and serve on a number of community boards, including the immediate past president of the Lakeshland Community Hospital Foundation, a trustee for the Community Foundation of North Central Washington. And I also served as the immediate past chair of the Washington State Chamber of Commerce Executives. In my day job, I serve as the CEO of the Lakeshland Chamber of Commerce, and I've been doing that for almost 2 decades. But I'm heading into my 4th term in the House of Representatives, serving as the ranking member of the capital budget. I was the ranking member of the K-12 education budget before assuming the budget role. I still serve on the K-12 education committee and also serve as a member of the appropriations committee, which is responsible for drafting the general fund budget, and been doing that my entire time in the House of Representatives. And as Representative Goehner mentioned, it's been an honor and privilege to serve. And I look forward to continuing to serve the people all over the new legislative district that is the 12th.
Thank you for your answers. The next question will have a 90-second response, so please reset the timer for 90 seconds. Next question will be Mr. Goehner. What are your priorities for the next legislative session?
Well, my priorities really do revolve somewhat around local government. As I mentioned, that serving as a county commissioner gave me a great opportunity to experience what the local governments are faced with. You know, I've always felt like the government that's best is the one that works closest to the people, and that's our local governments. Unfortunately, the legislature doesn't always understand the implications on local government. So it's incumbent upon all of us who have had that local government experience to make sure that people do understand how that plays out. Transportation, as I mentioned, is another committee that I'm on, and priorities that I'm working on, have to do with Highway 2, both on the east and west sides. I know how important that is. Also with environment and energy, there's so many things that work in that committee that we're really faced with some real challenges with as we move toward electrification, the resource adequacy, making sure that is there. So those are concerns. But apart from my committee assignments that I'm working on, I'm very concerned about public safety, making sure that we do have a safe environment for all of us to live in, and primarily for us to raise families in. So those are very generally the priorities that I have, as with others as well.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, same
Thanks, Joan. Well, as the ranking member of the capital budget, my eyes tilted both toward the 12th legislative district, but also statewide. The last biennium, we passed a historic budget, $6 billion, that funded infrastructure projects around Washington State. One of the things I'm most proud of is a brand new teaching hospital for mental and behavioral health professionals that we are building as a result of the collaboration on that capital budget. I'm also very interested in making sure we're helping our children recover after the pandemic, assessing their learning loss, understanding the socioeconomic gaps that have been created because of the pandemic, how do we make sure those kids are recovering well and being able to have an education in the classroom that's meaningful to them and their families. I too share concerns around the public safety initiatives that we need to take up in the legislature to ensure that all communities in Washington State do feel safe and do feel heard. I really want to continue to focus on a balanced approach to budgeting. As we just had the latest economic revenue forecast, we are starting to see our economy level off. And so as we adopt a new budget, I want to make sure that we're taking care of the priorities and the programs that we've created before we build new ones. And again, making sure that all the folks that are counting on us as legislators are receiving the benefits from their government that they're after. Continue to stay engaged with our local communities so that we are prioritizing the things that are most meaningful to them as they come and communicate with us in Olympia. So those are some of the top priorities that I will focus on when I return to Olympia.
Thank you. And Mr. Amenn.
I'm running partly because I think that in the state, people should have, a good shot at a good job, a good home, education for their children, the ability to have good healthcare and a good retirement. So these are like the motivations for me running, and my priorities in the legislature would be focused on empowering people to achieve that objective. I think that we need to think about our transportation, particularly in Highway 2. I've lived here quite some time, and I feel that each year I see people needlessly die on that highway, and I think that the government should just take action and address it. I think that with respect to like businesses, I'm a small business owner. I've been in the past. I really feel that there's a lot of additional burden put on small businesses, which makes it very difficult for them to provide good wages to their employees. And I'd like to potentially reduce kind of impact there. And the other area that I think is that there's a lot of social needs that we need to address. And I'll give you an example of something that would be a priority to me. I think that a lot of children that enter the foster care system, they age out of it. And when they age out of it, they're really not prepared for adulthood. They don't have the ability to potentially have a good job. And I really like to focus on things like that and address those. So those like 3 priorities for me next year. And I think we can get them done if we work together.
Great, thank you all for your answers. Here's the next question. Mr. Steele will be the first responder. Are you concerned about polarization in politics in Washington State? Why or why not? Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Joan. I actually take a lot of pride in negotiating one of the very most bipartisan budgets in Olympia. The capital budget is truly the only bipartisan budget that is adopted in Olympia, and that's because we work together from the beginning. We negotiate in good faith. I'm a strong proponent of working across the aisle. I have good friends on both sides of the aisle, and I think negotiation, engagement, and collaboration are the way we get things done in Olympia. And I would tell you, and I hope this assures a lot of folks out there, Washington State is not the federal government. We have 98% of our votes are collaborative. It's 98-0 in the House typically on 98% of the issues we're dealing with. We work together very collaboratively. So I've been privileged to develop those good relationships with folks on the other side of the aisle. And I think it's really something that I would invite folks to come down and witness. You'll watch us, moving back and forth across the House floor as we communicate with one another. We sit behind the speaker's dais and talk collaboratively, because we are there to get things done for all of Washington. And I pride myself on being able to listen to all sides of an issue and have an open door policy for folks on either side of the aisle so that we can truly understand perspective and work together to achieve good things. So all in all, I would say Washington State is a collaborative environment. The legislature is a collaborative environment because we all work together to ensure that environment.
Thank you. Mr. Amenn, you're next. Same question.
Sure. Yes, I think that the country as a whole and even Washington State is polarized. I think maybe we're a little less than other parts of the country, but I think it's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I feel that deep down, most people across the political spectrum, there's a lot of commonality. And if I were elected to the position, I would look to build bridges and to kind of solve things that we have common goals and common solutions. But I really do think that the divide in part comes from potentially the leadership. I think that the leadership in some cases inflames that divide. And I think that people who assume a position in the legislature should look to heal that and look to provide leadership along those lines. So that would be something that I would seek to do. I think it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Goehner.
Am I concerned about the polarization? Yes, I am, because it does seem like we have some very critical issues that we're dealing with at the state level that we don't have that collaborative working arrangement. And what I'm concerned about is not allowing both sides to have input. And Representative Steele mentioned how many times we are very collaborative, but we also have some very critical decisions that are being made. Case in point was the police reform, where there was very little input across the aisle. And when you have that happen, then you lose the perspective of the other person. I've always, in my time as a public servant, I've always tried to try and understand people's view that is not in agreement with me, because I want to know that where are they coming from? Where am I coming from? Where can we meet in the middle? Is there an opportunity to really forge a solution that is really meaningful for society as a whole? But if we have some of these clear divisive issues where there is not that dialogue, we really preclude ourselves from coming up with long-term meaningful solutions for the state. And that's a real concern of mine. I do appreciate the opportunity to develop relationships, and I think that's critical, but there is that polarization that does preclude that from happening.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your answers. Our next question is about climate change. What, if anything, should be done to mitigate concerns about climate change in Washington state? Mr. Amenn.
I think that what the role of the state in mitigating climate change is really to set policy that enables the creativity of the people of the state to solve that problem. I don't think that the solution can come directly from the state. I think that the state needs to focus on creating an environment where there could be innovation in battery technology and in energy technology. And I think that's where the state should focus. I don't feel that the state should mandate solutions. It should let solutions develop. And that's something that I've learned being in the tech. I'm a software developer for some startup companies. The most successful one was Real Networks. And in that space, people are very it tapped me into and really got me to believe in the creativity of people. So I think we as a nation, and particularly people in the state, can really, if they're empowered to do it by the state legislature and the government, solve our problems in a very direct and nice way with technology and innovation.
Thank you. Mr. Goehner, you're next.
Thank you. There are many things that we can be doing. I think we're moving toward, we are making great strides as far as reducing some of the emissions sources that we have. I think as we do this, though, we also need to keep in mind the outcomes for our citizens. For example, if we outlaw and ban natural gas, there may be a benefit, but does that benefit really translate into the most meaningful change that we can make? Because it's the people at the lower end of the income scales that will be most impacted. Their lives would be definitely changed. And so, when we think about what we're doing, I've always felt like we need to really, analyze our return on our investment. And sometimes some of the things that we are doing really is not getting us the best bang for our buck, and actually achieving the results that we hope to achieve. So as we move forward, I think we need to be very careful in what we do and how we do it. But the mitigations that we're talking about, they definitely are taking place. And as I said, we need to make sure that it doesn't negatively impact some of the unintended people that we will actually be impacting significantly.
Thank you, gentlemen. And Mr. Steele.
Well, I think there is a lot that the legislature can actually do to engage in this process. One of the things that we're proud of in the 12th Legislative District is our investment in the innovation around hydrogen fuel technology. The capital budget has also been instrumental in developing hydrogen fuel stations. We're working with companies like Toyota, BMW, to advance that hydrogen fuel cell technology so that can become a reality in manufacturing to further reduce our carbon footprint. I'm proud of the work that I'm doing with Commissioner Franz in her forest management, because as we all know, one of the largest carbon emitters in Washington state is forest fires. So how we manage our forests becomes very, very important if we want to reduce our carbon footprint. Working with the governor's office to do that as well is extremely important. I think to echo what Representative Goehner mentioned, though, we also have to look at this from a pragmatic approach. We have to be able to bring our citizens along in meaningful ways that get them engaged and make them feel like they're part of the solution. We can't just force things upon them and expect behavior to change. We have to provide tools for that behavior to change, and we have to be thought leaders in that behavioral change. I really am proud of the fact that in the 12th Legislative District, a good portion of our district emits zero carbon. We continue to develop public policy around that piece because of our very carbon-free footprint and the hydropower and the renewable hydropower that we have in the 12th Legislative District. The state is able to adopt reasonable goals around carbon emission that they would not otherwise be able to do. So I'm proud of that work, and I look forward to continuing it.
Thank you all. Next question. What do you believe are the 3 best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearms incidents in our state. Mr. Goehner, you're first.
Three best ideas. I think in what we've done as a state, I think education is probably primary. We have a significant number of gun owners who are very responsible, but any gun owner really does need to know, the obligations and responsibilities that they have, know how to use that firearm safely, and ensure that we don't have incidents. Now, a lot of the situations that we've had too, there's a mental health component that needs to be considered. As Representative Steele mentioned, we have made commitments at the state level to ensure that that is being addressed. But there are so many issues that come from that. A third idea, I guess, I don't know whether it's a best idea, but it's really making sure that firearms are secured. If people own firearms, I guess it goes back to what I was saying, is that they need to be responsible for that ownership, and that is a very significant responsibility that needs to be embraced by anyone who has a firearm.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, you're next. Same question.
Thank you, Joan. I would echo the comments made by Representative Goehner. I think primarily, if we're going to have firearm availability in our communities, we need to make sure that people that have those firearms are educated, they understand the responsibility that comes along with owning a firearm. The state needs to do more, frankly, around this mental and behavioral health crisis that we're in. Wraparound services need to be available for folks. We need to identify folks earlier. One of the things that I'm proud of is allocating money in the general fund budget to get counselors, psychological counselors into the schools, into the buildings, so that we can work with these kids. I'm also a huge proponent of making sure that our school resource officers are developing appropriate relationships with our students, with our parents, that folks have access to those resources around mental and behavioral health, so that we can really focus on getting folks the services that they need. I also would agree that if you're going to be an owner of a firearm in Washington State, you need to be responsible with that firearm. That includes appropriately locking that up, appropriately educating anyone in your household, anyone in your family, what it means to have the very real responsibility of owning a firearm. Those are three really solid things that we can do as a state that will, I think, ultimately influence behavior, because that's what we want to achieve. We want folks to be responsible with these things. We want folks that are going out and buying these things to understand the very real gravity of owning a firearm. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Amenn, same question.
Sure. I think the three things that I would look into is, I really think that we need to make a significant investment in mental health. I think that if you look at a number of these mass shootings, it is very attributed to the mental health of that person. That's one issue, and I think that could be considerable investment there. I also think that we have to think about and learn from these terrible events that have happened throughout our country, particularly at schools, and understand why current policies and laws were not effective. And I think we need to either fix those policies and laws to make sure that they can be effective, as well as make sure that they're being enforced. I think that there's a significant amount of resources maybe the state needs to throw at it to make sure those policies are effectively executed, and we could stop some of these terrible events that are happening particularly at the schools. And then the third thing, and this is because I grew up in New York City, the third thing that I would look at is, I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of violence in communities that are not as well off. And I think that improving and making efforts into those communities to give them a more of an economic viable future would also reduce it. They potentially would not necessarily have to. I think there's a link between violence and drugs, and maybe that would disincentivize them to be involved in drugs and reduce the violence that way. So I think it's a three-pronged approach: mental health, enforcement of the law, and better conditions for people, particularly economically. And I think that would greatly reduce the deaths that come from firearms.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions. Next question. In your opinion, is there sufficient access to behavioral health care across the state of Washington If yes, would you recommend any modifications to the programs? If no, what would you prioritize to increase access? Mr. Steele, you are first.
Thank you, Joan. My answer is no. There is not sufficient access to mental health and behavioral health care across Washington State. One of the tasks that I've really laid out to my colleagues on the capital budget as we invest in facilities devoted to mental and behavioral health, we need to make sure there is a geographic diversity across Washington. Because often what we see is when we adopt these budgets, urban areas are getting a lot of these resources and rural areas, like the 12th legislative district, are falling short. And we need to be cognizant of that, make an effort to make sure those folks in those rural areas who are dealing with the same problems that folks are dealing with in the urban areas are getting access to the care they need. We have invested, in my time in the legislature, over $1 billion in mental and behavioral health facilities, and that's not enough because the problem is increasing, and we really need to, I think, reevaluate our approach to how we get services out to people. One of the things that I've been critical of at the state level is how folks access care. And once they access that care, what are the wraparound services that they need in order to adequately recover from addiction, get out of a cycle of violence, move away from those afflictions, those mental diseases? Are they getting the medications? Are they getting the access to those things that they need? Those should be the priorities of government for those who are struggling with these very real mental health crises. And I think, again, we need to focus on making sure that our services and our programs are reaching everyone across Washington State. And we have a lot of work to do, and I'm committed to continuing that work.
Thank you. Mr. Amenn, same question.
Yes, sure. With respect to this, yes, I think that that area is significantly underfunded, or there's not enough resources. And my approach would be slightly different than I think a lot of the other people that are in leadership. I feel that it's important for the government to contribute financially, but I really do not think that there's going to be sufficient amount of money to provide all of the services we need. So I think that the government needs, and that the leadership needs, to reach out to these wonderful organizations, these nonprofit organizations, the businesses and community, and just general good citizens, and empower them and lead them to address this issue in a big way. I think that together, if we broaden our approach, we'll find to be able to provide the resources that the state can't provide on its own through funding. So it's a big difference for me. I'd like to focus on empowering people and organizations and having public-private partnerships. And that only happens when you have the leadership in the legislature and in government that make it a priority and a focus to build the bridges, and then fund it where it makes sense to fund it. But I do not believe that there's sufficient funds. I think if we look at it from a funding perspective and not an empowerment perspective, we're not going to solve our problem. We're going to always fall short on funding. I think we need to tap into the wonderful nature of the people of the state of Washington to solve this problem together by doing volunteer, business commitment, and nonprofit commitment, as well as state commitment.
Thank you. And Mr. Goehner, same question.
No, I don't believe either that there's sufficient access across the state. There is a focus on those areas that are more densely populated, and that's just the resources tend to be there. But in rural Washington, it, as Representative Steele mentioned, it is a real concern. Now, it's not only a concern from lack of facilities, but the lack of individuals who are trained to provide services. We are challenged with getting people educated, for this, because it's a very unique skill set. And I believe that you really have to have a calling to want to, engage in this, career. But the state has made some great strides as far as making commitments and with the dollars toward that. But without having the individuals and qualified and highly skilled individuals to perform, the tasks and the counseling that needs to happen, we will still be, inadequate in providing that access. And I think that that's something that we are certainly aware of, but getting people committed to serving in this area is a definite challenge that we have as a society. And I don't believe it's just unique to the state of Washington. But at least, here in our state, we are acknowledging that and doing all we can to address those concerns.
Great, thank you. Here is the yes or no question that we talked about earlier. It will not be timed, and we are looking for a simple yes or no response. The question asks about voting options in our state. Do you support allowing ranked choice voting as a voting option in jurisdictions and districts? Please just answer yes or no. Mr. Amenn, your first, yes or no?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Goehner, yes or
No.
no? Thank you.
The qualification.
And Mr. Steele, yes or no?
No.
Thank you very much for not making me laugh on that one. Okay, so we're going to return to our 90-second responses. And here is the first question. It will go to Mr. Goehner. How would you propose to make housing or rent more affordable in our area, Mr. Goehner?
This is a major issue that we're all facing with. And when I say us all, I mean every community within the state, whether it's the highly dense populated areas like the Puget Sound or even rural areas. Vacancy rates are so low. There really isn't the housing supply. Now we've got so many different elements that play into that. And as I've mentioned before about the local government involvement that I have, housing is one of the key things. But we have made it really difficult with some of our land use policies and with the permitting that goes on and some of the regulations that we have that have continually driven up the cost of housing. And now with the changes that we made in the landlord-tenant relationship, it makes it more less tenable, I guess, for someone to be a landlord. And that also makes it more difficult to, if people choose not to rent, but they want to sell their properties, then that takes that rental, off the market. And some people are really only at a level where they can be renters. So we are addressing these things, trying to come up with solutions. Once again, this should be something that works across the aisle. We shouldn't be polarized on this, but we should be able to come up with some solutions that are meaningful.
Thank you. And Mr. Steele, you're next.
Thanks for the question. I'll just speak to my legislative record in this issue area. I am a true advocate for workforce housing in all of our community across Washington. It's an issue that is facing every community. In my day job, as I represent nearly 500 small businesses, we're seeing staff shortages like never before. And part of that is being driven by the inability of folks to get housing, which is being driven by lack of supply, as Representative Goehner mentioned. So a couple of bills that I've introduced create public-private partnerships. The first one creates a public-private partnership that would allow a private developer to pay sales tax on a project, a building project, to deliver units. The local jurisdiction they're building in would then be eligible for a sales tax remittance from the state, 4.38%, which would come back to that local jurisdiction. They would invest in infrastructure around that project. So the hard costs, the sunk costs that those developers typically wouldn't be able to recoup, thereby keeping the unit prices lower. It's got great progress in the legislature. It's loved by both sides of the aisle, and I plan to reintroduce it as soon as I come back to the legislature in January. Another one that'll be really beneficial to our district is an adjustment of AMI. One of the things that's causing folks an inability to be able to access the resources the state lays out is this 80% AMI number that just creates a barrier to entry. For our district, a more appropriate number would be 120% to 150%. I plan to introduce that legislation as well, thereby giving folks access to the amount of resources we put out in Washington State across the 12th legislative district. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Amenn, same question.
I think that I look at it, there's three things that contribute to the housing problem. One is, I think that zoning laws can be misused to stop growth or stop housing development or make it difficult for housing development. So I think that there should be reforms in that to make sure that zoning laws should, uphold what they were intended for, to make sure that people's health are not threatened and that they build safe houses. So I think that we should revisit the way zoning laws are done to make sure that they're not being used to stop the development of housing. I also think that there's a significant burden that doesn't achieve an effective end. I think that it's important for us to make sure that we do not, we have a good environment and we maintain a good environment and we continually improve our environment. But I think that there's a lot of environmental hoops that developers have to jump through that don't achieve an environmental end. And I think that we need to visit that and remove those, but still keep in place those environmental rules that are really set up to protect the environment. And then the third thing is, I think that the government, and I've got this personal experience on the City Council of Gobar, some governments are misusing the Growth Management Act. The Growth Management Act is an act that kind of centers development around cities, and Gobar is a city, but the Snohomish County is preventing Gobar from providing affordable housing to many people because they're trying to enforce having sewers, where in the short run, we will not be able to have sewers, but in the long run, we will eventually have them. And they prevent us from developing, doing development there. And I think if that should be changed to make sure that it just truly adheres to what the Growth Management Act was intended to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for going over a little bit.
No punishment. Next question. What are your ideas for ensuring that sufficient infrastructure is planned and built to support your proposed development? Mr. Steele.
Great question. So we are in this last biennial budget for the capital budget, we invested nearly $400 million in broadband infrastructure and build out. Infrastructure was a primary focus of the federal government as well, which is the primary reason we passed a historic budget of nearly $6 billion on the capital side for the state. So we are committed to investing in infrastructure. I also think that innovation and technology is going to help us as we develop these things. As I mentioned, as it relates to housing infrastructure, I have a solution that would create this public-private partnership between local jurisdictions and these developers in order to get that infrastructure developed and to create unit numbers, because we need to create supply, we need to generate supply so that markets can adjust to that and meet the demand of the housing issues in Washington state. But again, the capital budget really is primarily focused on facilities, infrastructure, and state agencies. So we do a lot of work in that area to make sure that infrastructure is built out all across Washington. And again, focusing on that geographic diversity is super important to me. As someone who represents rural Washington, we need to make sure that that infrastructure is happening, that build out is happening all over Washington state in meaningful ways and in the smallest of communities, so that we all have a chance to prosper, create jobs, and develop economies, which is the primary role of the budget which I write. So I'm very proud of that work, and we'll continue to focus on that infrastructure development.
Thank you. Same question, Mr. Amenn.
May you repeat the question? I apologize.
It's kind of on the topic you were finishing on your previous question. What are your ideas for ensuring that sufficient infrastructure is planned and built to support proposed development?
Okay. So one of the things that I think we need to do is the state needs to spend its infrastructure money more wisely. I think that in some cases they have policies that prevent us to effectively spend infrastructure. I wrote a piece of software for some companies that do like build outs for the state in terms of schools and federal state buildings, and they have this concept of like satisfying the prevailing wage. And in that case, in some cases, they're spending additional money, $60,000, to adhere to the prevailing wage policy. So I'm not saying we should change the prevailing wage policy, but we should look towards making it more efficient and streamlined so that a company doesn't have to spend $60,000 to adhere to prevailing wage. So that's more effective uses of our money. I also think that we should look for more public-private partnership. I think that if we tie development, tied the infrastructure development to housing development and allow people to participate in public-private partnerships, that would go a long way to satisfying that as well. So my focus is looking at where there's inefficiencies on how we spend the money, making sure that we eliminate those, that we'll have additional money for infrastructure, and seek out public-private partnership as well as to further enhance and make that money go further.
Thank you. And Mr. Goehner, same question.
Thank you. One of the biggest challenges that any local jurisdiction has is providing infrastructure for the proposed development. Now, we have at the state level, we have funds that allow for low interest loans, and the one that is most prevalent is probably the Public Works Trust Fund. There's what's called CURB, it's for community economic revitalization. There's some other entities that have dollars available. And it's really important that the legislature recognizes that the partnerships that need to happen, they do need to be from the public and those developers. And when those local jurisdictions are not able to access funding, it really prevents them from doing the developments that they really need to provide more housing. And it's kind of a vicious cycle there, that we don't get enough housing, but because we can't, the developer can't afford to pull it off on his own. But then the city, whether it's sewer, water, roads, broadband, whatever, they need some financing mechanism that makes it feasible for them to pursue that. So I think the most important thing that we should do as a state is ensure that these funds that have been set up are adequately funded and provide the resources for local governments to do the development they need in their infrastructure.
Thank you, gentlemen. Here's your next question. Do you believe the taxing system in Washington state is equitable and sufficient to meet the needs of the state and the local communities? If not, what changes would you propose? Mr. Amenn, you are first.
I don't think that the tax system is currently equitable. I think that a lot of the the average person is taking paying a large share of the taxes, particularly through the B&O tax. I would like to see that reformed and rethought in a significant way so that it doesn't really impact businesses as much as it does. So that's something that I would like to consider. I would also consider there's a tax that's that's through regulation, and I'd like to think that that's an unfair burden that gets put on businesses, but then the businesses pass the cost directly onto the consumer. And I think that there's a way to be smart with our regulation so that it doesn't put so much burden on businesses, but still achieve the effective end. And I would look to rethinking the way we regulate businesses so that they don't pass those costs on. So when I look at taxes, I look at taxes directly paid by people, but also indirect taxes that government puts on businesses and that get passed through the citizens. So I would focus on making sure that the B&O tax is done differently. And I will also make sure that these regulatory burdens that they put on businesses achieve an end, and we reduce them as small as possible. And I'll give you the example of the prevailing wage that I did. I wrote a piece of software that saved them a significant amount of money, but I think that the state could have enforce prevailing wage law much easier without as much regulatory burden that ultimately gets passed on to the consumer. So those are the two things that are I would look towards.
Thank you. And Mr. Goehner, same question.
Well, I don't believe that it's equitable, but I do believe that it's sufficient. And ideally, I would like to see things change, but obviously we are generating more than enough revenue because we continue to grow the state's budget. We continue to add on programs that are relying on the particular structure that we have right now, that being sales tax and property taxes. So if we're going to be looking at changes, we need to recognize what kinds of commitments we've made based on these revenues. I think that there are other options that may be reasonable to have, but as was mentioned, Robert mentioned there that as far as the B&O tax, I do think that's a very unfair tax because it's taxing the gross before any profit is made of a business, and it makes it difficult for businesses to be successful, and they're the ones that are employing people that providing jobs and stability. At the property tax level, that's primarily driven by school taxes that the state has, which we've made a commitment. We have to make sure that we fund our schools. So, I mean, if we're going to, as I mentioned, make some changes, we have to recognize what commitments we've made based on our current tax structure, and that'll be a significant challenge.
Thank you, and Mr. Steele.
Yes, thank you. As Representative Goehner mentioned, we do indeed have enough revenue. I mean, we passed a historic general fund budget this last biennium, to the tune of $66 billion, the largest in the state's history. We've seen an increase in the state's general fund budget by over 75% in the last 10 years alone, and most household budgets have not grown in the same way. I will speak to B&O tax. I think it's interesting. As a graduate from the Business School of Economics at Pacific Lutheran University, I wrote my senior thesis on the regressive nature of B&O tax and the political reality of ever doing away with it. And here we are. I'll tell you, I did graduate about 20-ish years ago from college. We're still talking about the regressive nature of B&O tax. And I have worked directly with Representative Frame, a Democrat out of the Seattle area. We've established a tax commitment committee to actually do an evaluation of the total tax structure. And my commitment to her has been, I'm willing to look at the whole tax structure that exists in Washington State, as long as we're willing to dismantle the whole thing and start fresh. And that includes a really significant look at the B&O tax and the regressive nature of that. But we, again, have made significant commitments around schools. I mean, 54% of our general fund budget is devoted to the K-12 system. We're going to continue to see increases in that system, and revenues are keeping pace with that. But again, I think some of us are really suffering from the regressive nature of the tax system in Washington. And my commitment to the public and to my colleagues on the Democratic caucus is that I'm willing to look at it holistically and work with them to develop something new.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your answers. Here's your next question. Would you support making any changes to existing state law or the state constitution regarding access to abortion? Why or why not? If so, what changes would you propose? Mr. Goehner, you are first.
As far as supporting changes, I think I would support changes, but honestly, it hasn't been an issue that we've talked a lot about because it's only been recently that it's been brought back to the state. So I guess at this point, I will say that I am pro-life, but I don't really have proposed changes right now, but that would be something I think we'd have to look at carefully, and whatever changes we make, ensure that it is in the best interest of our state.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, you're next.
Thank you. As Mr. Goehner, Representative Goehner alluded to, this is sort of settled law in Washington State. Nothing will be changing in our future here in Washington. But what I will tell you is I remain committed as a Republican in my caucus to making sure that women have adequate access to health care, reproductive health and resources around that. I think that is something that we all should support, making sure that services are available, that we walk alongside these women that are struggling with these very real issues in their lives and giving them access to the care that they need. So I'm committed to that, and I will continue to be committed to that, making sure that those resources are available and that women in our state feel supported and acknowledged in these very difficult situations.
Thank you. Mr. Amenn, same question.
No, I don't see a need to change the Constitution with respect to this issue of abortion, nor do I think that existing laws should change. I think that if there is a movement to change the existing law or the Constitution, I support that there should be a holistic discussion, and that together in the state we find a balance between both sides, because this is a really contentious issue, and I'd be very careful about making sure that whatever we decide, if we make any movement off of where we are today, that people that across the political spectrum and across the belief felt that their voices are heard, and that whatever decision happens, they can, at least live with it. I think that this is a really divisive issue, and it's really important to me to make sure that we heal ourselves from it. But at the same time, I don't see any need to make any changes to the existing law or the Constitution with respect to this issue.
Thank you for your answers. Your next question is about the healthcare systems. And as independent healthcare systems merge with religious healthcare systems, do you have concerns about any resulting limited healthcare options? What actions, if any, would you recommend? Mr. Steele, you are first.
Thank you. This issue has actually come up several times in the legislature since I've been in office. And I've always made a commitment to the physicians that meet with me that I want to make sure that as a legislature, we are doing what we can to give them the resources to do their jobs appropriately, so that the relationship is between the doctor and the patient, and that the legislature is not involved in the middle. We want to make sure that the patient has access to the critical care that they need, to the professional services that doctors and healthcare providers offer. And I don't think that's something that the legislature should be in between. So my commitment to that is to say, whether they're a religious institution, a public institution, we need to give doctors the ability to work and advocate for their patients in the most meaningful way. So again, I don't think the legislature should be in between that relationship between the patient and the doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Amenn. Same question.
I don't have as much concern. Like, I'm basically fundamentally, I believe in the free market, and I believe that the government should let businesses make decisions, and healthcare is a business, and they should make decisions what's best for the allocation of resources. So having, like, with your initial part of the question of do I have concerns about the mergers or acquisitions? I don't. But what I do have a concern about is that the government should ensure that even after these acquisitions, if it turns out that certain types of healthcare procedures are limited, then the government should step in and figure a way to create an environment and adjust the environment to make sure that that healthcare is available. But until that happens, which I don't think it will happen with the mergers, until it happens, until it's really effective, I think the government should have a hands-off policy, allow efficiencies to work themselves in the market, but at the same time, be on the ready to create alternatives if the market somehow cuts off certain types of healthcare to the citizens as a whole, particularly women.
Thank you. And Mr. Goehner.
I'm very concerned about healthcare in general across the state. There are some very selective institutions that will only receive some people because they want to be profitable. And some of these mergers are taking place because some of the providers are not being profitable. They're trying to become more efficient and more by collaborating on some of the services that they can still stay in business. But it does not mean that we as a society are getting more extensive health care. And particularly in rural Washington, it's a real challenge. We see numerous rural facilities that are community owned that are struggling to stay afloat. And it's so important for every citizen to have access to good health care. I think that's a key facility for any community is to have good health care. So if these mergers happen, I'm not concerned about the merger itself, but I am concerned about possibly areas that may not be providing, may not be receiving the health care that we certainly would like to see all Washington citizens experience.
Thank you. Okay, well, we made it. Here's the last question. And could we please reset the timer to 60 seconds? What additional issues or information would you like to bring to the attention of the community? Mr. Amenn, you are first.
The one thing that I'd like to bring attention, and it's really the motivation for me running, is a different way of looking in the way government should work, in particular leadership. I feel that the chief motivation for government and the chief role of government is to empower people to help themselves, but more importantly, to also empower people to help those people that can't help themselves. And I think that right now there's a philosophy and there's a way of looking at it where we look to government as solving the problems. And really what I want to do is allow government to create an environment where every citizen can solve their own problems and then turn around and help those people who can't help themselves, because I think it just magnifies their ability. We can't, use tax dollars to solve all our problems. We have to use volunteerism. We have to use the goodwill and just the goodness of people as a whole and empowering them. And I think government a lot of times gets in the way of that. And I'd like to change that by getting elected. And that would be my chief goal, is to empower people. Thank you.
Mr. Goehner, same question.
I think there are a number of things that are not really being addressed. They're easy to be glossed over, and they go from environmental issues, and I think one of the key things is the forest management tool that isn't being done well within the state. Now, we as a state, the DNR is doing well, but we do have significant lands of the federal lands that are not being treated, and it creates a real environmental issue. But from the social issues, we have drugs We have homelessness. We have police reform that needs to be addressed. There's so many things that we need to get people make changes are, but the key thing is to get people involved. And I would encourage everyone to certainly exercise their right to vote, and make sure that when you do vote that you're an educated voter, and that you have the information that really will make you a good well-informed citizen.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Steele.
I just want to thank you for the opportunity this evening. And I'll just reiterate what I said before. My commitment in the legislature remains to things around mental and behavioral health access to healthcare in general, quality education for our children in the K-12 system, and looking at early learning as well. I mean, we didn't have a chance to talk about that this evening, but early learning and access to early learning and childcare is fundamental in making sure kids are ready and prepared to enter kindergarten. So I'll continue to focus on that. I think making sure that our communities feel safe is really, really important. And also the forest management piece that Representative Goehner mentioned, the Washington State is full of a lot of incredible, beautiful resources. We need to be advocates for that management. We need to work with the federal government to make sure that those resources are adequately cared for, and that we're living up to our commitment to the K-12 system for the trust lands. So there's a lot of things that I think we have on our plate as we head into this next legislative cycle. I'm excited to represent the new portions of the 12th legislative district, and I look forward to serving and having folks stay engaged in the process. Thank you.
Thank you all for your excellent answers this evening. The League appreciates these candidates for joining us and for running for office. A recording of this forum and others will be available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and YouTube channel. Find links at wlvsnoho.org. That's lwvsnoho.org. We encourage you to explore additional information about these and all candidates. Voter pamphlets are being mailed to residences now, so look to receive your pamphlet soon. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is another good source for nonpartisan voting information. Ballots will be mailed on October 20th, and Election Day is November 8th. Please be a voter. This concludes our candidate forum. Thank you all.